Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Marina Santos. The Treasure Coast is home to a variety of marine life. Sharks call our oceans home during various times of the year. To provide some information about these fascinating creatures is Stephen Cucchiara. He has a very interesting name. And I hope I pronounced it right. If I didn't, then he'll correct me. He's the associate professor and shark biologist at Florida Atlantic University. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
What type of sharks are seen on the Treasure Coast?
We have a bunch of different species that are found around here in South Florida. And at certain times of the year, you get large numbers of blacktip sharks and spinner sharks. And people tend to say that, oh, there's a lot of spinner sharks because they see these sharks jumping up and spinning around and dropping back into the water. But blacktip sharks do the same thing. So just because you see a shark spinning doesn't necessarily mean it's a spinner. It could be a blacktip as well. They're very difficult to distinguish.
I see.
In addition to the large numbers of blacktips and spinners, we also have hammerheads here. We have tiger sharks. We have bull sharks. We have any number of other species, though certainly not in the same abundance.
I actually have seen one of the tiger sharks in the Indian River Lagoon, and it was very scary because they are large.
They do get rather big, and it's interesting when you're doing an aerial survey and you're flying over. You can see all the blacktips and the spinners are all about the same size, and then you see something that's 2x the size, double the size, and you know that's a tiger shark straight away.
So how long have you been studying sharks?
I've been working on sharks for a number of years, probably, let's see, what's 94 to now is almost 20 years. And in particular, I've been here at FAU on the faculty since 2004. So for almost 10 years now at FAU, we've been developing a shark research program to look at the sharks and the stingrays found here in the South Florida area.
Okay. So which ones actually migrate through the Treasure Coast each year?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Each year, it's the same sort of phenomenon. Every winter, you know, around December, January, February or so, there are a lot of reports of large shark aggregations here in South Florida. And it's something that happens every year, and it always catches the media's attention. Not only is it a local phenomenon, I've received calls from Texas, from California saying, wow, look at all the sharks off your coast, what's happening? And everyone wants to know what's going on. Well, what it is it's this annual migration of primarily blacktip sharks that come down every winter and spend the winter down here in South Florida, and then they'll start to move north again in the spring. So we have a really great opportunity here in South Florida to look at shark populations and shark movements. It's interesting because we have pretty much the entire eastern seaboard population of sharks that come right down and funnel right down here through South Florida, spend the winter, and then go off again. So by looking at the numbers here, we have a pretty good estimate of what we're looking at for the entire East Coast population of blacktips and spinner sharks.
Okay. Stephen, are they all dangerous, or because, you know, I
Sure.
think our viewers would really like to know
Sure,
that.
sure. This is one of the most commonly asked questions. Do I need to be worried about all these sharks?
Exactly.
I mean, you can see a lot of these sharks coming down every year, and it's, you know, it raises concerns for people. Well, there's two things I would say, and I don't know whether they're good or bad, but I'll just say them. One is, yes, the blacktips and the spinners are responsible for more bites on people than any other sharks, here in Florida at least. And the reason is primarily numbers. You have a large number of people in the water here in Florida, and you have a large numbers of these sharks that are very close to shore. And because they're close to shore, where the people are, you've got a bigger probability of encounter, and that's why you have the potential to have these bites. Now, the other thing I will say is that, fortunately, the bites by these blacktips and spinner sharks are relatively minor. In terms of
not lethal.
Not lethal, no. No. For all intents and purposes, no fatal bites. These sharks are primarily fish eaters. They're eating fish. They have relatively small mouths, you know, sharp pointy teeth still, but in a relatively small mouth. And so I think a lot of the problem arises is when you have surfers out there or swimmers, especially in, you know, turbid water where it's not necessarily very clear, and the shark sees something flashing in the water. And it may just be, you know, the shiny palm of the hand or the heel or something, but it looks perhaps like a fish. And the shark, not quite sure, can't quite see, goes up to investigate, and it investigates with its mouth.
I see.
Goes along and goes chomp. And so most of the bites are relatively minor, and they're on the appendages, your hands, your legs, your
Okay.
arms, things like that.
So that's the reason basically why they come close to shores, because they're looking for food?
Yeah, so here's where it gets really interesting. The large numbers of sharks that come down here every winter, the black tips and the spinners on their migrations, a lot of them are following these bait balls, large numbers of bait fish like the mullets and the little herrings that come in, and those will hug the shoreline. And so what happens is necessarily the sharks come in and hug the shoreline. That's where their food is. And that's what tends to lead to these human-shark interactions, let's call them.
I see. And so is that healthy when we have large numbers of sharks in the population?
Yeah, so if you look at the numbers that we're getting down here in South Florida, we can, like I said, we can sort of get an indication of whether the shark population is doing well. The advantage here is that in South Florida, we are really blessed with a variety of conditions that work in our favor. One is that we have a very narrow shelf. That is to say, the water gets very deep very quickly offshore. You've got very narrow area, as opposed to up north in Georgia, the Carolinas, where you have a shelf that extends for hundreds of kilometers before it starts to get deep.
I see.
You couple that with the fact that we have down here in South Florida the very strong Gulf Stream current. And the Gulf Stream is running north right along, just offshore. And if you're going to be migrating, you don't want to fight it. You want to, get out of the way of the current, and that necessarily hugs them in close to shore. Because they have the sharks close to shore, avoiding the Gulf Stream current and, in the narrow shelf area, that gives us an opportunity to look at numbers of sharks that are here. And that gives us an opportunity to get an idea of population size. If they were distributed over a broad area, it's really hard to count that, but having them close really makes a difference. That's why we're so fortunate here in South Florida. We have this opportunity to do this type of survey and get a number on sharks.
So where do they go when they leave South Florida?
Right. So they'll winter down here, January, February or so, and then around March they start to move further north, and they'll move up through Melbourne area, Cape Canaveral, up through Georgia, the Carolinas, and they get about as far as Cape Hatteras in the summertime, and then they'll spend the summer in the Carolinas and Georgia, and then in the fall they'll start to make their movement back down south again. Okay.
So what have you found regarding sharks that's interesting that you think our viewers would like to hear about?
So, well, for this example, the shark survey, the aerial survey that we've been doing for the past couple of years, we've come up with some interesting results that, people were previously unaware of. Everyone knew that they came back and forth, and that's the extent of it. We were surprised that in looking at the scientific literature, there wasn't really much else known about it. What we found is that there's a really good correlation between shark abundance and water temperature. When the water temperature gets to around 22 Celsius or so, that's when the sharks are here. When the water starts to warm up, that's when the sharks leave. So they're following their preferred temperature. If 22 C is here in South Florida in the wintertime, 22 C may be further north and Georgia, Carolinas throughout the summer, and maybe that's as warm as it gets in North Carolina in the summer, and that's where they are. Okay. And they follow their temperature maximum back and forth and take advantage of the being comfortable. I liken it under the snowbirds who come down here to Florida every winter. They live up north in the summer, and they come down here in the wintertime.
That's true. So are there any concerns that you've found in your studies of the sharks?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. It's something that people tend to focus on. How do the sharks affect me? The concern about the humans. But
what about the sharks?
Let's turn it the other way around. How are we affecting the sharks? Well, one of the interesting aspects of this aerial survey work is that we've been able to isolate or identify what times a year the sharks are in different locations. And as I said, January, February here in South Florida, and then start to move north. One of the concerns would be that you know, commercial fishing interests could come down and really do a significant amount of damage if they were to fish locally down here at certain times of the year. They would have the potential to have a huge impact on the entire eastern seaboard population of sharks.
Wow.
And so I think it's important that we consider not just what about us, but what about them? What can we do to make sure that the sharks are protected? Because really healthy oceans are reliant upon these top-level predators to you know, cull out the sick fish, the weaker fish, and
Right.
make the environment healthier all around.
Now, speaking about that real quick, we don't have much more time, but I know Indian River Lagoon has had some issues, water quality. How does that affect the sharks?
That's a really good question. The Indian River Lagoon has had a whole suite of problems over the years, and one of the concerns is that the Indian River Lagoon is a popular nursery ground for bull sharks. So bull sharks will come in, the moms will drop their babies in the IRL, and the mom goes back out to sea, and the babies will live here for a year or two and grow up and then eventually move off to join the adults. If the Indian River Lagoon habitat is degraded to the
Right.
point where there's not enough food for the baby bull sharks to eat, they're going to be in major strife. And it's going to have an effect on the long-term growth. If you reduce baby bull shark populations now, you may not notice it for another dozen or 20 years until you realize, hey, there are none left to come back and reproduce down the road. So it's important that we put forth the efforts to make our environment good now in order to maintain everything as for future generations of sharks and generations of humans.
Wow, that's very interesting. This is the first time I've actually had conversations about sharks. And I hope our viewers really enjoyed and got a lot of good information. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for being with us. And don't forget, the joy is in the solution. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye. For more information on today's topic, you can contact our guest at the phone number or web address on your screen.